It doesn't take for one to be the best of the best to be remembered, nor one of the worst. What it takes is the right amount of effort and love for the craft to stand out, taking the good of those before you and making them into your own. To take forth onto new ambitions and apply what you have learned. The best of games are always remembered so fondly with a blinding sheen of perfection that can do no wrong, despite any shortcomings that may truly be there. While the worst of games are remembered in the opposite perspective. Glaring problems and disasters regardless of any attempt the developer might have put forward in bringing forth an enjoyable product. However, it's the middle marks that people at times overlook. The good games that fit right between, the ones that may not be perfect, but for those that took the time, they can look back and remember fondly the good times they had spent. Hello, and welcome to Between the Cushions, a deep dive into the games that we have completed here on the Archive Couch with either our Classic Hour gameplay or with our many other couchmates. I'm your host for today's segment, Blue Pyro, and we are here to highlight the game Croc Legend of the Gobbos. Croc was released in 1997 for the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Windows. North America and Europe would get their hands on the title first, as Japan would get the game a few months later, as well in 1998 as Croc Po Island. Developed by Argonaut Software and published by Fox Interactive, and Mitsui Mita Quest in Japan. Croc is an early adopter of the 3D platforming genre, where the player controls a green crocodile in his quest to free his fuzzy village adopting companions, known as the Gobbos, from the evil magic of King Rufus, which we will touch on a bit later. Argonaut Software, originally founded in 1982 and ceased to exist in early 2007, was founded by a teen of the name Jez Sean. Their first game, released by the name of Skyline Attack for the Commodore 64 in 1984, a shoot-'em-up side-scrolling air combat-based game. A few other games in the same genre would be released before Argonaut would find themselves an opportunity to collaborate with Nintendo. In these early years for Nintendo of 1990, Argonaut submitted a proof-of-concept method of defeating the Game Boy's copyright protection mechanism. Having all eyes on their team, Jeshawn provided prototypes of a game that was inspired from the previous Star Glider series dubbed SNES Glider. These prototypes originally were running on the NES and a few weeks later on the prototype SNES. In an interview, Jez said, "I told them that this is as good as it's going to get unless they let us design some hardware to make the SNES better at 3D. Amazingly, even though I had never done any hardware before, they said yes and gave me $1 million to make it happen." This famous hardware developed into what we know as the Super FX chip, originally codenamed Mathematical Argonaut Rotation I/O, or Mario for short. This chip was used only in a handful of games, the most famous of which is what developed from this partnership, Star Fox. From here, Argonaut would go on to develop more titles for Nintendo and the PC. Some were either unique titles, like Stunt Race FX, as others were licensed titles, like Scooby-Doo Mystery. Two great games of their own, in my opinion. Regardless, though, Argonaut and Nintendo seemed to have a good development running, and development for their next games were underway. One was Star Fox 2, with an even further enhanced FX chip, while the other was a prototype 3D platformer, Yoshi-inspired game, codenamed Yoshi Racing. The former, though, was shelved at 95% completion. The latter was ultimately rejected and seemingly ended the relationship between the companies. Instead of scrapping the prototype completely, Argonaut decided to retool the game into a unique property, creating a lovable green crocodile that we have here today. Croc came into the spotlight in the midst of the 3D mascot platforming craze, contending against giants like Mario himself, and soon to follow quick-to-fame contenders like Banjo-Kazooie, among many others. Croc, though, unlike the two mentioned previously, initial release never made it to the N64, but onto the new rival, the PlayStation. The creation of the character, though, was to be marginally similar to Yoshi, and given something unique enough to stand out. A backpack to replace the saddle, quirky eyes that carried on with an art style of the game, and a single fang protruding from his mouth, like that of a house cat. The team also wanted to keep in the concept of something to save, but the damsel in distress, like a princess, was just too bizarre for their taste. As such, the Gobbos were created to fill that void. These cute little fuzzballs were the caretakers and adoptive guardians of our hero. The in-game manual gives further details about this in a fairly comedic, childlike story manner.
The Legend of the Gobbos. Who were the Gobbos? Examine ancient paintings from the time of their civilization and you will find that the Gobbos were a short, furry people who could be politely described as Gobbo-esque. But what of their soul, their character? One historian wrote that the Gobbos were among the most advanced civilizations of their day, making great strides in science and literature, a people whose intelligence shines like a beacon in the night. It should be noted that this historian was himself a Gobbo, and not only made numerous grammatical errors in his account, but also misspelled Gobbo. So the Gobbos were a simple people, a race whose greatest inventions were edible deodorant and the wind-powered cow moistener. In over 2,000 years of existence, the Gobbos only sent 3 of their kind to college, and 2 of those were returned postage due. Okay, so they weren't the sharpest pins in the cushion, but were they lovable? You bet. So lovable that they would often keep each other as pets. But oddly enough, it was their very lovability, their very kind-hearted innocence, that set in motion a chain of events that would send the Gobbos plummeting towards a terrifying fate, a fate worse than death, a fate so frightening that those with heart conditions may wish to stop reading now, although it's really not that frightening.
The manual goes on to read, explaining in a more story-based manner, the opening cutscene to the game, when the player starts up a new profile.
It all started one morning in the 3rd month of the year of the Soup Spoon. King Rufus the Intolerant, ruler of the Gobbos, was down by the riverbank watching the sunrise. He had just finished breathing a sigh of relief that once again the sun had returned, when suddenly a small basket floated ashore. He and a group of his Gobbo subjects huddled around it. Peering inside, they saw a baby crocodile. Naturally, they assumed he must be the early leader in the annual midget crocodile basket race. Not that there had ever been such an event, but you never know about these things, and many of the Gobbos placed bets just to be on the safe side. After a couple of hours, when no other baskets had come by, the Gobbos decided that perhaps there was no race, or that it had been called off the night before by crocodiles who shared their concern that the sun had gone away for good. The Gobbos were at first wary of the little reptile, but were quickly won over by his vulnerability and inquisitive nature. King Rufus decided that the Gobbos would raise the crocodile as one of their own, and that he himself would care for it and instruct it in all the ways of the Gobbos. The Gobbos fell in love with their new charge. As he was a crocodile, they began to call him Crocodile. But then someone thought of a clever new name for him, Croc. although to some of the Gobbos, he will always be known as Mr. Fun Socks or Choo Choo McBoogie. Croc learned quickly from his Gobbo friends. He surprised them with just how Gobbo-like he was. He could sing their anthem backwards and forwards, and won every Gobbo dance contest he entered. In fact, Lil Croc was so Gobbo-like that it had never even occurred to him to take a single bite out of a Gobbo. As far as he was concerned, he was a Gobbo, and thus a time of great joy reigned in Gobbo Valley. Croc was healthy, King Rufus was happy, and his subjects hadn't had so much fun since the year of the 3-minute egg timer. Then Croc grew. In one fantastic growth spurt, Croc grew as tall as 3 Gobbos stacked on top of each other. He started eating like crazy. For breakfast alone, he ate over 150 baskets of peas. While walking, he would accidentally smash through buildings and trip over homes. A simple game of patty cake with friends would lead to multiple concussions and internal bleeding. Despite his friends' efforts to brush off their accidents, Croc began to feel out of place in the Gobbo Valley. Just as Croc decided to do something about this, a Gobbo ran past screaming Dantinis. The Gobbos had long told stories of the Dantinis, a band of villains known far and wide for their ruthless burning, wanton looting, and marvelous singing voices. What was worse was that whenever there were Dantinis, Baron Dante could not be far behind. King of all villains, Baron Dante was stronger than 1,000 Dantinis, and he had a long established hatred for all things Gobbo. He had seen the Gobbos and Croc being blissfully happy and decided that enough was enough. It was time for the Gobbos to suffer. The valley swarmed with Dantinis as they captured Gobbo after Gobbo and threw them into cages. Dante watched it all, laughing his horrible laugh. King Rufus knew he had to save Croc. He tail-swiped the gong that sat in the center of the valley, and it rang, summoning Beanie the bird. She appeared immediately, and King Rufus instructed her to whisk Croc away to safety. Rufus looked at Croc. "You're our only hope." Before he could say anything, Beanie spirited Croc away in a shower of magical sparklies, just as Baron Dante snatched up the king in his iron hand. Baron Dante had taken over all of Gobbo Valley. He used his magical powers throughout the land, turning good creatures to evil. Ladybugs, ducks, lizards, fish, and mountain goats all became horrific monsters under his command. Baron Dante stashed Gobbos under a Dantini guard throughout his new kingdom so that if he needed someone to taunt or even bring to tears, a cute little Gobbo would always be nearby. The Gobbos, meantime, being a highly social group, were distraught at being separated from each other. Baron Dante kept King Rufus as a personal pet, locked in a cage in the back of his castle. Rufus was taunted day and night by Dantinis. He consoled himself in these dreadful hours that at least Croc was out of the Baron's reach.
On a side note with this story, I love how the manual here adds footnotes that better explain things. Like, what is the year of the soup spoon?
At the start of each year, the Gobbo High Priestess would announce the kitchen utensil that, when put down their pants, would bring good luck. Gobbos took this very seriously, although some began to question the practice during the year of the electric can opener.
Or why is King Rufus the Intolerable?
People far and wide had heard of King Rufus the Intolerant and feared him for his name alone. Of course, the Gobos knew his full name was King Rufus the Lactose Intolerant, and therefore only feared him after a big bowl of cottage cheese.
And then what's going on with their singing voices?
The Dantini Glee Club would have won all the big choral contests had they not been disqualified by eating the judges.
The charm of this game is heavy in the child storyboard-like feel. From its looks, to its game feel and tone, all the way to even the manual. Not only that, but some of the levels are puns like most children's humor. Be really careful, or I snow him so well, or even Dungeon of Defright. The game knows its target audience and is just having fun with it, but a little more on that later. This level game could be played with either a regular controller in a tank-style format, or with the newer analog controls that were introduced with the PlayStation. While development for this game was going through, these analog controllers were not introduced until late in development. Croc was mainly planned around the Sega Saturn's directional pattern control D-pad. Though there is no direct or definitive proof, it is believed that Croc's early prototype stages did strike influence into its rival game of Super Mario 64. Given the timing of when Yoshi's racing prototype mentioned earlier was presented to Nintendo and rejected because, quote, they already had a similar game in development, end quote, it is possible that the last-minute tweaks could have been influenced what Nintendo was already creating. Or even perhaps, since both were for the same end goal of a family-friendly 3D platformer in isolated worlds, the coincidences are nothing more than that, coincidences. But that's for you to decide. Moving on, Croc's progression mechanics is similar to that of the popular predecessors, such as the world dash level format of Mario games, where the world itself determines the environment, but the sublevels determine the different stages for the player to take on. Following one step further, the life bar system is similar to that of Sonic, where Croc goes around collecting gems, and when damaged, loses all that he is holding onto. Essentially, playing the role I like to call, from the Lord of the Rings, the one ring to rule them all, or in this case, Rainbow Gem. Though, if Croc collects enough of these, he earns an extra life. Fortunately though, if Croc were to run out of lives, though a game over will appear on the screen, the player is only thrown out of the level they were defeated on, with 3 default lives, instead of the cruel joke of starting over from the start of the world, or even worse, from your last save spot. Speaking of saving, Croc's game actually implements 2 types of save functions, one being that of a memory card data, but for those who are not familiar with, or couldn't afford one, could use the classic password system of older generations, with sequence codes typed in from the D-pad of various directional inputs, and oh my how long these codes were. There are also 3 sets of collectibles in this game. Starting off is the 5 colored gems that are hidden in each level, to unlock a final section for the player to challenge themselves on. Hidden behind these doors, not only is a typical harder challenge to conquer, but a reward of the lost Gobbo in that stage for the player to rescue. Gobbos, being the second of the collection, as mentioned earlier, are the little brown fuzzy friends of Croc that are scattered around the world. 5 are hidden in each level, with the final one hidden behind the final crystal door. If the player can rescue all the Gobbos in the provided sections, they are granted an S-based level, and each of these worlds helms the final collectible, the Jigsaw piece. These levels were their own challenges-based stages, and held no Gobbos, but if the player wanted to get the true ending, and a final 5th world, they would need to collect all 8 to do so. And doing this was the only way to achieve 100% in the game. This could be seen as similar to that of the Donkey Kong Country series, with the DK coins or the banana birds. Reviews for Croc were generally high, but not overly topping the charts. Hitting roughly in the 80% territory, critics immediately picked up on how the game took so many mechanics from other titles to where it might not have brought much new to the table, but did so well in blending the things that made others good that the core of the game here was enjoyable throughout. Some praised the music, while others criticized the lack of variety. Those on the PC ends of the game deemed a title as a generic 3D platformer and were unimpressed. Despite what the critics wrote, Croc was a bestseller in the UK for 2 months and was Agronaut's best-selling game, with that of 3.5 million units sold on the PlayStation alone. However, this isn't all I want to say about this game. There are a bit of extra change from between the cushions I would like to add into this piece as well. As I've said in our playthrough of this game, I adore Croc, from its catchy music to its gameplay and so much more. While tank controls are not ideal or the norm in modern sense of 3D platformers, there are a few games that I feel it works well in, and this honestly is one of them. Though admittedly, the camera is that of a fight to have to work with properly. Most early 3D platformers were in the learning phases on how to do this properly, so I have a little grace here. In the midst of our recording sessions though, I did try to switch into the analog controls. My brain went into panic as I had already muscle memory on how to work Croc in a tank control format, so I could not adjust. But I do commend that it is something that could be on the fly changed if necessary. When this game came out, the mascot character platformer craze was in its high peak. So, many developers needed a cool hip character that kids could latch onto and just demand to play. But with so many saturating the market, the key parts of a good game just fell short on most of those titles. Croc itself proved you can establish a new character if you put forth the right efforts. The charm of the characters and story, the feel of the controls and challenges, and commitment to what they were making, this and other key points are what make this game so great. As for the story, Croc keeps its lore and telling to that of a children's storybook. It's not overly complicated and meets the aesthetic perfectly. The colors, the shape, music, and the small levels and simple premise of rescue your friends all bring the player into that of a storybook profile. Though I make this comparison, it's also not that of a preschooler style game of a simple click and solve, but like that of Mario, where the first levels are simple enough to help the player learn from the start, where the player is safe adds an ease to a challenge. The storybook feel, though, extends so heavily into that of the manual as stated earlier, and probably one of my most favorite things about this game. Developers went that extra mile to commit their story to have that childlike feel with such silly names and corny lines that make you smile and shake your head. The enemies being the dainties, the cute little friends being so unapologetically empty-headed, however, acting as if they were ever so sophisticated. It has a charm to its writing that many wish they could have. The commitment to this trope, if you will, is done just right enough that it doesn't feel like it's patronizing, but more of just here for the joy and fun of the game. The challenge, though, for this game was the perfect fit as well into the family game genre. It's one that was opening easy for kids to play and learn, and even try to progress. However, as the later stages proceed, they can pass it to their older brother or parent to play along and help on parts that they couldn't succeed at before, or failed together and enjoy the time that they shared. Though I would like to add, the difficulty of World 4 steps it up way more than it should. The shadow under Croc is not dark enough and easily determined his footing. Ice magic in the ice world, aka white attack on a white background, should never be allowed, and the speed challenge of a certain platform moment are so tight that even an experienced gamer would cry! But other than moments like this, the game challenges aren't too outrageous. Collectathons were not as popular back in the previous generations, but certainly weren't completely absent. Their popularity grew in this generation of gaming, to be clear. The rewards for the player's extra commitment to playing their games could extend to either that of harder levels to challenge themselves into, or payouts into something more, if not both. While this game isn't particularly heavy in the collection game, the small amount it does have is nice, as to not feel overwhelming to complete. However, I will say I do wish that they put in a count system to show how many were needed, as my last playthrough, I never got enough to even see a challenge level to earn one of those jigsaw pieces. That being said, after how upsetting World 4 stages were, with precision timing and those narrow windows, I dread the idea of looking into what World 5 would be. Though, I am writing and reading this from a script right now. If I know me, when it comes to editing, I'll be showing around this time the footage of the hidden levels here to show the difficulty one would be experiencing to conquer. And before you ask, will I be doing the honorable thing and trying to earn the right to play these stages by collecting those Gobbos like the developers intended? Of course not. I will be doing what any 5-year-old child, real or inner, would do, and type the codes to unlock them. Thanks to the power of the internet! Or cheat code books if you would find those in the stores and you want to go into the authentic route. But let me tell you, these codes are way too frickin' long. Regardless though, even if I didn't achieve these levels in the righteous manner, I am glad to hear there is something for achieving the collection grind. It gives a game a bit of replay value and a challenge for one to take on, even if it makes you want to hurl something at one particular flying enemy who guards a monkey bar bridge with a narrow window of success for a slow little crocodile to swing across. And no, I'm not still raging over that one particular moment. I'm perfectly fine and content. Promise! Moving on. Agronauts certainly did something right with this game either way. They took the right elements of older games and brought them into something new. Croc was a fresh take on a classic style with a step up into 3D to make that challenging leap. After the success of this game, they would go on to make a sequel shortly after, 2 years later, for the PC and the PS1 called Croc 2, and a Game Boy Color version of the series 1 year after that, neither of which hit the same praise levels as the first. They would go on to make other games of both the licensed properties as well as new IPs, such as Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and iNinja. The latter, by the way, a great game in a ridiculous nature I would recommend to anyone who suffers from the inner child syndrome like myself. Unfortunately, however, Agronauts closed their doors in late 2004 after their last release of Catwoman the Game, which released earlier in that year. However, in a surprising turn of events, just roughly 2 decades later, in August 2024, Agornaut has reopened its doors and would focus on releasing and remastering their existing franchises alongside publications of third-party independent titles. Its first release would be that of Croc Legend of the Gobbos, though if you glance onto their Wikipedia page, you will notice that Star Fox 2 is credited by Agornaut when it was released in 2017. If I had to guess, the love for Star Fox 2 must have been enough to pull Jez Sean back into the ring with his old brand. Whether it be his own love from the fans, or a mix of both is up to speculation. But either way, it's nice to see a great studio return reinvigorated to bring back some good-natured content back to the medium. The remaster was originally slated to come back in late 2024, but delays pushed it back into April 2nd, 2025. It was released on Nintendo Switch, PC, PS4 and 5, Xbox Series S and X, and the Xbox One. As of the time of writing, it has only released just a week ago, and reviews seem to be about as on par as they were when it first released all those years ago. While I may not be picking up the remake myself, I cannot recommend it enough to someone who has nostalgia or a young one that's starting into gaming space that they want to play alongside with. I want to thank you all for watching. ArchiveCouch is primarily a Let's Play channel, as we play through older games spanning from the NES all the way up to the PS4. So please come join me and my friends on the couch as we post new videos rotating weekday schedules at noon. Between the Cushions, we'll be covering games that we have completed previously on the channel. If there are games we have finished you would like to make a retrospect on, please leave a comment down below on what game you would like us to cover next. Or keep an eye out for our community poll that lets our couch friends speak on which game they would like to see next. That being said, please note it does take a lot of editing and process for these videos, but when we can complete them, they will be uploaded onto the Sunday time slot. I hope to catch you all in the next one. See ya!